James Calloway woke up the same way he had for the better part of 20 years. He was up before the light, got going, and had the eggs on the pan before the coffee finished brewing. He ate standing at the counter the way a man does when there is no one to sit across from. The kitchen was quiet except for the low tick of the heating vent and the sound of Rufus shifting his weight on the floor near the stove. Rufus was a mixed breed with a brown coat that went tan at the chest and around the muzzle. He was not a young dog anymore, but he moved like one when the occasion called for it. He sat beside the stove watching the plate with the patient focus of a dog who had learned that patience sometimes paid off. Calloway scraped the last of the eggs onto the floor for him without making a show of it. He rinsed the pan and set it on the drying rack. He poured the rest of the coffee into his thermos and screwed the lid down tight. That thermos went everywhere with him. It had a dent on one side from a parking lot incident years ago that he had never bothered to think about fixing. He pulled his jacket off the hook near the back door, and Rufus was already waiting on the mat before he had the second arm through. The two of them moved through the morning without any wasted motion. They had done it enough times that it no longer required thought. The truck was cold, and the heater took a few minutes to find its footing. Calloway backed out of the drive with one hand on the wheel, and Rufus sitting tall in the passenger seat with his nose aimed at the vent gap. The drive into town from Calloway's place took 11 minutes on a slow morning. He had made it so many times he could have done it without thinking. He passed the grain elevator that had been there longer than the town's oldest resident could remember. He passed the two-pump gas station that had not updated its sign price in longer than felt reasonable. He passed the diner where the same 3 trucks sat in the gravel lot every single morning without variation. He passed the hardware store with the hand-lettered hours taped inside the window from a previous winter. He passed the water tower with the town name painted across it in letters that had faded from red to a color that no longer had a good name. He turned off the main road and pulled into the lot behind the Hallow Creek Sheriff's Department at 7 minutes past 7. It was the kind of town that looked exactly like what it was. Nothing was hiding behind anything else. Nobody was pretending the place was bigger or more important than it happened to be. That was the part Calloway had always liked most about it. Rufus hopped out behind him and trotted through the side door like he was on the payroll and had been for years. Patty Owens was already at the dispatch desk with her headset on and a cup of something hot steaming beside her keyboard. She gave Calloway a nod without looking up from her screen. Patty had been running that desk for over 2 decades. She knew the voice of every regular caller in the county and could tell from the first word whether it was going to be a real problem or not. Calloway hung his jacket on the hook inside his office door and set the thermos on the corner of the desk where it always went. He pulled the overnight report and went through it standing up. A fender bender out on Route 9 had been cleared before midnight. A noise complaint from the Alderman address on Birch Street had gone quiet before anyone arrived on scene. Nothing that needed his attention in any urgent way. He signed off on both sheets and dropped them in the done pile. Lou Briggs came to the front at 7:30, moving the way he always did, slow and deliberate like a man conserving energy for something important that never quite arrived. Lou was heavy-set with a face that had settled into a permanent expression of mild skepticism. He had been with the department longer than anyone, including Calloway. He dropped into his chair and pulled up his terminal and made a low sound in his throat that did not mean anything specific. It was just something Lou did when the morning was unremarkable. Eddie Parrish came in 10 minutes behind him with a gas station bag in one hand, and a story already half told before he cleared the door. It was something about his neighbor and a truck that had backed into a mailbox at the end of the man's own driveway. Eddie had a talent for finding the story in things that did not have one. Lou told him nobody had asked. Eddie kept going anyway and got to the end of it and laughed at his own punchline. Lou did not look up from his screen. Calloway listened from his office with the door cracked and finished the first cup from his thermos. Ricky Aldane came in from early patrol just before 8. She had covered the east grid and the county road past the feed store and had nothing to flag. She said it quietly and without drama the way Ricky said most things. She was the youngest in the department by a stretch. She was also the most organized person Calloway had ever worked with. She sat at her desk and started on her patrol log without being prompted. Her notes were always detailed and always on time. Calloway appreciated that more than he ever said out loud. The morning moved the way mornings in Hallow Creek tended to move. Calloway sat in on a brief with Lou about a property line dispute between two families on the north side of town that had been simmering for 2 weeks. It was the kind of thing unlikely to go anywhere serious, but needed to be documented in case it did. Eddie took a call about a dog loose on Fenner Street and drove out to handle it. Patty ran the radio with the calm efficiency of someone who had heard every variety of human problem at least once. Rufus moved between Calloway's office and the front area throughout the morning. He had his spots in both places. Under Calloway's desk was the main one. He would put his chin on the man's boot and stay there for as long as Calloway stayed in the chair. The lunch hour came and went without much fanfare. Calloway ate at his desk from a paper bag he had stopped for on the way in. Lou drove to the diner. Eddie microwaved something from the break room that Ricky said she could smell from across the building. Ricky ate a sandwich at her desk and kept working. By mid-afternoon, the department had settled into the quiet stretch that usually ran until close of shift. Lou was at his desk with one hand pressed against his lower back, complaining to Patty through the open doorway about a chair that had been giving him trouble for going on 3 years. Patty told him to put in a requisition. Lou said he had put in 2 already. Patty said to put in a 3rd. Eddie was back from Fenner Street and was telling a story about the dog that Calloway was fairly certain had already been told before with a different dog in it. Ricky was working through a stack of vehicle registration paperwork with her head down. The afternoon light came to the front windows at a low flat angle and made the dust in the air visible. It was a quiet that people who did not grow up in small towns sometimes mistook for boredom. Calloway never had. He was at his desk reviewing a county road maintenance request that had been sitting in his inbox for a week when Eddie appeared in the office doorway. He knocked on the frame, even though the door was standing open. It was something Eddie always did out of habit. Calloway looked up. Eddie said he had taken a report earlier in the day he wanted to mention before the shift wrapped. He had a small notebook open in his hand. A woman named Claire Hadley had been reported missing. Her sister June had called it in. June said she had not been able to reach Claire in 3 days. No answer on the phone. No response to messages. She had driven by Claire's house, and the car was there, but nobody came to the door. Calloway leaned back in his chair. He asked whether Claire had any history of going off without telling people. Eddie said, not according to June. He asked whether there was any known trouble in Claire's life, anything that might explain it. Eddie said June could not point to anything specific. She just said that 3 days was too long for Claire to go without being in contact with someone. Calloway asked where Claire worked. Eddie said the hardware store on the east side. Calloway wrote the name down on a notepad beside his keyboard. Claire Hadley. He told Eddie to keep the report open and to reach out to the hardware store first thing in the morning to confirm whether she had been into work. Eddie said he would handle it. He tucked the notebook back in his shirt pocket and headed back to his desk. Calloway looked at the name on the notepad for a moment longer than he meant to. He could not have said what it was about those 2 words that kept his attention. Missing persons calls came in from time to time, and most resolved within a day or 2. A miscommunication. A weekend somewhere with a dead phone. He had learned a long time ago not to put too much weight on a report before the picture got clearer. He capped the pen and set it down beside the pad. He finished the maintenance request and signed it. At 6, he locked his office and came out into the front area. Patty was wrapping up the evening handoff notes. Lou was pulling his jacket on near the door. Eddie waved from across the room without looking up. Ricky had already gone. Calloway called Rufus out from under the desk, and the dog came without needing to be told twice. They walked out to the truck in the cooling evening air. The lot was nearly empty. The town was settling into its nighttime, quiet the way it always did at that hour. Calloway started the truck and let it warm for a minute before backing out. The drive home was the same 11 minutes in reverse. He kept the radio low. The town moved past the windows in the last of the day's light. He did not think about anything in particular on the way back. But when he sat down at the kitchen table later with a plate he had not put much thought into making, he realized the name was still sitting somewhere at the back of his mind. Claire Hadley. He did not know the woman beyond the name on the notepad. He could not have placed her face, but the report had a quality to it that he could not easily set aside. He turned the lights out at 10 and lay in the dark with Rufus at the foot of the bed. The house was quiet. The road outside was quiet. Hallow Creek at night was the kind of quiet that most people would have found comfortable. Calloway usually did. He told himself it would likely be nothing by morning. He almost believed it. Calloway was at his desk by 6:40 the next morning. He had the overnight report read and set aside before anyone else came to the door. He pulled up what Eddie had logged on Claire Hadley and opened a formal case file on his terminal. He filled in what he had. Female, early 30s. Lived alone on the east side of town, on a street called Dunner Road. Employed at Farrow's Hardware on the east side. Last confirmed contact with her sister June was 3 days prior on a Thursday evening. Car still at the residence as of Sunday. No response to calls or messages. No known reason for the silence. It was a thin file. He knew it was thin, but thin was enough to move on. He called June Hadley at 7 and told her he wanted to come by that morning with one of his deputies. June said she would be home. She sounded like she had not slept. Calloway told Ricky when she came in just before 8, and they took one of the department vehicles out to June's address. June lived in a ground floor apartment on the west side in a building that was kept up well enough. She met them at the door before they reached the porch steps. She was composed in a way that people get when they have been holding something together by will alone long enough that the effort has become its own kind of exhaustion. She was mid-30s with dark hair pulled back and the careful stillness of someone trying very hard not to fall apart in front of strangers. She shook their hands and brought them inside without any ceremony. The apartment was tidy. Coffee was already made. She poured without asking whether they wanted any. Calloway appreciated that. He sat at the kitchen table and let June talk. She said the last time she spoke to Claire was a Thursday evening around 7. They had been on the phone for about 20 minutes. Nothing unusual in the conversation. Claire said she was tired from a long week at the store. She mentioned she was planning to stay in that weekend and rest. She sounded fine. June had texted her Saturday morning to check in and gotten no reply. She tried calling Saturday afternoon and got voicemail. She told herself Claire was resting the way she had said she would. She drove by on Sunday morning, and Claire's car was sitting in the driveway. The curtains in the front window were drawn. She knocked on the door, and nobody answered. She knocked again and waited. Nothing. She called through the door. Still nothing. That was when she called Eddie. Calloway asked whether Claire had a habit of going quiet on people. June said no. Never for more than a few hours if she was busy. Not days. He asked whether Claire had been seeing anyone. June said no. Not for about 6 months. He asked whether that had ended badly. June said not particularly. Just faded. He asked about friends. June gave 3 names and addresses for 2 of them. He asked whether anyone at the hardware store might have noticed something in the week before Claire went silent. June said she did not know the people at Farrow's well enough to say, but that Claire seemed like working there and had never complained about anyone there specifically. She handed over her phone without being asked and said they could take whatever they needed from it. Calloway passed the phone to Ricky, who began pulling contact information and going to the camera roll while Calloway finished with June. He asked a few more things. Whether Claire had any financial trouble she knew of. Whether she had mentioned anything recently that seemed to be weighing on her. June said no to both. Claire was not a person who carried things visibly. She was private but not secretive. There was a difference, and June understood it. Calloway thanked her and told her they would be in touch. He told her to call the department directly if she heard anything or thought of anything else, no matter how small. June nodded. She walked them to the door and stood there watching them go. Calloway did not look back, but he felt it. They sat in the department vehicle in the parking lot, while Ricky finished copying information from June's phone. She had 109 photos of Claire on the camera roll going back about 2 years. Ricky photographed all of them with her own phone for the file. She handed June's phone back to Calloway, and he went back upstairs and returned it to June at the door without saying anything more than a thank you. From the parking lot, he called the department and had Patty pull any address history on Claire Hadley and the 3 friends June had named. Then he and Ricky split the follow-up work. Ricky took the drive out to Farrow's Hardware to talk to the co-workers. Calloway drove to a house on Tennick Street, where a neighbor named Bev Trask had left a callback number with Eddie the day before. Bev was a woman in her 60s who had lived next door to Claire for 4 years. She came to the door in a house coat and met Calloway on the steps. She was not unfriendly. She had the manner of a person who had spent a lot of time watching the world from a comfortable distance and had developed firm opinions about most of it. She said she had seen Claire the week before. She believed it was Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. Claire had been coming in from her car with 2 bags from the grocery on 5th. She had waved from the driveway. Bev had waved back from the porch. That was the entirety of it. She said Claire kept to herself but was pleasant when their paths crossed. No loud nights at the house. No unfamiliar cars she had noticed sitting out front for any length of time. No behavior in the weeks before that struck her as out of the ordinary. Calloway thanked her and got back in the truck. He drove back to the department, and Ricky arrived about 10 minutes behind him. She came in and dropped into her chair and opened her notepad on the desk. Calloway got coffee and pulled the chair up. Ricky said the co-workers at Farrow's were cooperative and had nothing that helped. Claire had worked her last shift on the Friday before she went silent. She had seemed the same as any other day. No conflict with anyone at the store that anyone was aware of. No one she appeared to be avoiding. She had said goodbye at the end of her shift in the same way she always did. A co-worker named Pam had texted her over the weekend about picking up an extra shift and had not heard back. She had assumed Claire was busy or had her phone off and had not thought much more of it. Calloway sat with that for a moment. He turned his coffee cup in both hands the way he did when he was working through something. There was no thread anywhere in what they had gathered. No argument. No person she had reason to fear. No change in her behavior in the days before. Just a woman who had been fine on a Thursday evening and had not been heard from since. The absence of a thread was not the same as the absence of problem. He had worked long enough to know that sometimes the cleanest disappearances were the ones that needed the most attention. He went back to his office and pulled the door mostly closed. He connected his laptop to the photo file Ricky had pulled from June's phone. He selected all the images from the past 12 months and sent them to the printer down the hall. While they printed, he made 2 more calls. One to the first friend June had named, who said she had not spoken to Claire in about a week and had not found that unusual. One to the second friend, who said the same. He collected the printed photos from the tray and brought them back to his desk. He laid them out across the surface in rough chronological order. 41 photos in the span of 12 months. Birthdays. A cookout in someone's backyard. A trip somewhere with a lake behind the group. Claire at a street fair. Claire at what looked like a work event. He went through them the way he went through anything, without deciding what he was looking for before he found it. He was scanning backgrounds, faces that appeared more than once, vehicles, anything that did not belong. He was about halfway through the stack when he stopped. The photo was taken outdoors, a park from the look of it. Claire was in the foreground facing someone off camera and laughing. In the background at the far left edge of the frame near the tree lean, there was a shape. It was tall. It stood at the margin between the open grass and the trees. The image resolution at that distance was not strong enough to make out any detail. He told himself it was a shadow from a canopy. He told himself it was a post of some kind. He set the photo aside and kept moving through the rest of the stack. He reached the end and made a few notes. He stood up and went to the break room and got more coffee. When he came back, he sat down and looked at the stack and then reached over and picked up the one he had set aside. He put under the desk lamp and looked at it for a full minute. It was not a shadow. The shape had an outline that was distinct from anything behind it. It had height. It had proportion. It was standing in a way that nothing inanimate stands. He looked at the direction it was facing. It was facing Claire. He went back through the remaining photos, more slowly this time. Near the bottom of the stack, he found a second one, a different location entirely. A street somewhere in town. Claire standing with a woman on a sidewalk outside what looked like a coffee shop. In the background across the street, near the gap between two buildings the same shape, was standing. Same height, same stillness, same orientation toward Claire. He put the two photos side by side under the lamp and did not move for a long time. He did not go to the door. He did not call Ricky in. He did not say anything to anyone. He turned both photos face down on the desk. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. Then he got up and rinsed his cup in the break room and came back and worked on something else for the rest of the afternoon. Before he left, he put the two photos in a folder and set them in the top drawer of his desk. He told himself he would look at them again in the morning with clearer eyes. He told himself that on the drive home. He told himself that while he made dinner and while Rufus sat watching him from across the kitchen, the way Rufus did when something was off. Dogs notice things. Calloway had always believed that. He set the dish on the floor and stood at the counter and stared at nothing for a moment. Then he went to the couch and sat down and did not turn the television on. He just sat there in a quiet house in a quiet town and thought about two photographs with the same shape standing in the background of both. He almost believed his own explanation by the time he turned the light out. Almost. Calloway was at the department before 6. He had not slept well and had stopped trying around 4:30. He lay in the dark for a while listening to Rufus breathe at the foot of the bed and then gave up entirely. He dressed without turning the light on. He made coffee at the house and filled the thermos and drove in with Rufus before the sky had finished deciding what color it planned to be. He did not bother with the pretense of catching up on paperwork first. He went straight to his office and closed the door and opened the top drawer. He took the folder out and laid both photos on the desk under the lamp. He looked at them for a long time in the early morning quiet before anyone else arrived. The shape was still there in both. Same height in each frame. Same stillness. Same position at the outer edge of the image, like something that understood exactly how close it could stand without drawing attention. In the park photo, it was near the tree lean with the canopy behind it. In the street photo, it was in the gap between two buildings across the road. Both times it was facing Claire, not the camera, not the space around her. Claire specifically. He sat back and looked at the ceiling and thought about what that meant. He thought about it for a while And then he picked up a phone and called June Hadley. It was just past 6:30. June answered on the second ring, which told him she had not been sleeping either. He apologized for the hour and asked whether she had any other photos of Claire beyond what had been on the phone she had handed over. Physical prints. An old phone she might not have transferred yet. Anything going back a year or two. June said she had a box of printed photos from the past few years. She also still had her previous phone in a kitchen drawer. The camera roll on it had never been cleared. She said she could bring both to the apartment whenever he needed. Calloway said that morning if possible. June said she would be there by 9. He thanked her and set the phone down. He went out to the break room and filled his cup and came back and sat with the 2 photos until the rest of the crew started coming in. He heard Eddie come to the front and say something to Patty. He heard Lou's chair settle under him with its usual complaint. He heard Ricky hang up her jacket in the hall. He did not open his door. June arrived at 9:05 with a shoebox under one arm and the old phone in her jacket pocket. Calloway met her at the front and brought her back to the conference room. He thanked her again and told her he would get everything back to her as soon as he could. June set the box on the table and put the phone beside it. She looked like she wanted to ask something. He told her they were working it and that he would call her the moment there was anything to report. She nodded and left. Calloway took the box and the phone back to his office and closed the door. He plugged the old phone into his laptop charger, and while it powered up, he went through the box. There were 40 or 50 loose prints in it. Some were older, family gatherings from what looked like several years back, a holiday meal around a crowded table, a photo from what appeared to be a graduation. He sorted through them and set the older ones to the side. The ones from the past 2 years he laid out across the desk in rough order the same way he had done with the others the night before. He went through them one at a time without rushing. The shape was in the third one he picked up, a backyard barbecue. Claire in the center of the frame with people around her. At the back left corner of the yard near the fence line, the shape was standing. It was partially obscured by a folding table, but the upper portion was visible. Same height, same stillness. He set that photo aside and kept going. He found it again in a photo from what looked like a street festival. Claire was buying something from a vendor stall. The shape was across the street behind a group of people near a park truck. He found it in a photo taken inside what looked like a restaurant. Claire at a table with 2 other women. Through the window behind them across the parking lot, the shape was visible as a dark outline against a far tree line. He found it in 6 of the prints from a box. Then the old phone finished charging, and he went through that camera roll. There were 214 photos on it. He went through all of them in order. He found the shape in 11 of them, different locations, different times of year, different occasions, always the same, always at the edge of things, always facing her. He lined up every photo that contained the shape across his desk and the credenza behind him until he had run out of flat surface. 17 photos in total between the 2 sources. He stood in the middle of his office and looked at all of them together. Then he picked up the clearest one. It was a park photo from a day before. Good light. The shape was visible enough that its outline held up even when he looked at it from across the room. He took it out to main floor, where Eddie was at his desk eating something from the gas station bag. Calloway set the photo on the desk in front of him and asked if he recognized the location. Eddie leaned forward and looked at it and said it looked like Garner Park on the east side. He said you could tell from the pavilion roof visible in the upper right corner. Calloway asked if he noticed anything else in the frame. Eddie looked again. He tilted his head slightly and looked at the background. He said it was a nice photo of Claire and asked if that was what Calloway was getting at. Calloway asked again, anything at all in the background that stood out. Eddie looked a third time with the focused expression of a man trying to find the answer to a test he had not studied for. He said no, just trees. He handed the photo back and went back to his lunch. Calloway took the photo and set it on his own desk and walked back out to the main floor after lunch. Lou was at his terminal with his reading glasses on and a cup of cold coffee beside the keyboard. Calloway set the same photo in front of him without saying anything. Lou picked it up and held it at arm's length the way he did with anything he was asked to look at. He said it was a nice enough photo. He asked what he was supposed to be looking at. Calloway said just anything that caught his eye. Lou looked at it again and said he did not see anything particular and asked if this was about the Hadley case. Calloway said never mind and took the photo back. He walked back to his office and closed the door and stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by 17 photographs. Neither of them had seen it. He was certain they had looked. He was certain they had tried. They had looked directly at the frame where the shape was standing and seen nothing worth mentioning. He was the only one who could see it, and that fact pressed down on him in a way that was harder to sit within the shape itself. He went back to his office and closed the door. Through the wall, he could hear Eddie telling someone that Calloway had been acting like a man with a secret he was too proud to share. He said it like it was a joke. Nobody laughed. The office went quiet again after that. He spent the rest of the afternoon on a different angle. He pulled up the town community Facebook page and went back through posts from the past year. Event photos, fair photos, holiday parade photos, photos from the farmer's market that ran every Saturday through the summer. He went through every public post that contained a crowd photo or an outdoor gathering. He found the shape in 7 of them. It was not always near Claire. In several of them, Claire was not present at all. It was just there, at the back of a crowd watching the holiday parade, at the far end of the fairgrounds near the livestock barn, standing at the edge of the farmer's market lot, behind a row of vendor tents, always at the margins, always still, always watching whatever was in front of it. He printed every photo he found it in and added them to the wall. He got a corkboard from the supply closet and mounted it on the wall beside the window and pinned everything to it by date. When he stepped back and looked at the full spread of it, the room felt smaller than it had before. He pulled his office door shut and stood there looking at it. He had not eaten since morning, and it was past 6. He was not hungry. He could hear Eddie and Lou wrapping up on the other side of the door. He heard Patty hand off the desk to the evening dispatcher. He heard the front door open and close twice. The department got quiet. Calloway stayed in his office with a board and did not come out. He could hear the evening dispatcher settle in at Patty's desk and run through the handoff checklist. The building went to its nighttime hum. Rufus had been patient all day but pressed against his leg now in the way he did when he could feel something was wrong. Calloway reached down and put a hand on the dog's back without looking away from the board. He had worked enough cases to know when something was bigger than it looked at the surface. This was bigger. He did not know by how much yet, but it was bigger than a missing woman from a quiet street on the east side of a small town. He turned the desk lamp off and sat in the dark for a while before he drove home. The drive was quiet. Rufus sat in the passenger seat and watched the road the way he always did. Calloway did not turn the radio on. He thought about 17 photos taken across 12 months in different parts of Hallow Creek. He thought about the fact that 2 people had looked directly at the most obvious of them and seen nothing. He pulled into the drive and sat in the truck for a minute before going inside. The house was the same as he had left it. He fed Rufus and did not eat anything himself. He sat at the kitchen table with the thermos in front of him and the overhead light on and stayed there longer than he meant to. Whatever this was, it was not finished showing itself to him yet. He was certain of that much. He went to bed at 11 and lay there looking at the ceiling until well past midnight. Rufus shifted at the foot of the bed once and then went still. The house was quiet. The town outside was quiet. Calloway stared at the dark above him and thought about a shape that 7 different cameras had captured in 17 different photographs over the course of a year and that not one other person he had shown them could see. He did not have a word for what that meant. He just knew it meant something. He stayed late at the department again that night. The evening dispatcher had taken over the front desk, and the rest of the building had emptied out by 6:30. It was quiet enough that he could hear the ventilation system cycling on and off in the ceiling above his office. Rufus had eaten from the bowl Calloway kept in the bottom desk drawer and was settled under the desk with his head on his paws. Calloway stood at the corkboard with a box of pins and a county map he had pulled from the supply cabinet and went through every photo one more time. He had done this several times already in the past 2 days. This time felt different. This time he was not looking at the photos individually. He was looking at where they had been taken and when. Each location he could identify he marked on the map with a pin. He wrote the date of the photo on a small strip of paper and tucked it under the pin head, so he could read it from arm's length. Some of the locations were easy. The park on the east side, the farmer's market lot on 3rd, the fairgrounds on the county road. Others took him longer. He used street details in the background of photos to narrow things down. A particular storefront, a utility pole with a distinctive lean, a painted curb he recognized from a block he drove past twice a week. He worked through all 24 photos he had flagged across both sources and got pins into the map for 19 of them. The remaining 5 he could not place with enough certainty to commit to a location. He stepped back from the map and looked at the full spread of pins. The room was quiet. Rufus was asleep under the desk. Calloway looked at the pin positions for a long time, and the pattern came to him slowly, the way patterns do when you have been staring at something long enough for your brain to stop trying and just see. The pins were not scattered. They were not random. They formed an arc, a wide, slow curve that started on the north side of town near the fairgrounds and swept east, and then south through the residential areas and out toward the commercial district on the far end. He traced the arc with his finger without touching the map. It was not a complete circle. It was tightening. The older pins from photos taken more than 8 months ago sat at the outer edge of the curve. The more recent ones were closer in. Whatever had been moving through town had been doing so in a pattern, deliberate and methodical and patient in a way that made his neck feel tight. He got a ruler from his desk drawer and extended the arc lines outward past the edge of the town map. The lines did not close inside the town limits. They continued outward to the southeast past the last residential street and past the county road and off into the agricultural land beyond. He did not have a map large enough to show where they met. He pulled up the county parcel database on his laptop and zoomed out until he could see the full spread of land to the southeast of Hallow Creek. He overlaid the arc in his head against the satellite view on the screen. The lines converged at a point roughly 2 miles past the county road. He clicked on the parcel. It came up registered to an Arlen Bosch out of a rural route address on the far side of the property. Most of the acreage was listed as active agricultural use, corn and soy rotation from the aerial imagery. But in the far southeastern corner, there was a smaller parcel listed separately. The use classification read disused. The structure notation read barn. He sat back in his chair and looked at the screen for a while. Then he wrote the name down, Arlen Bosch. He shut the laptop and turned the lamp off and sat in the dark office for a few minutes before gathering Rufus and heading out to the truck. He did not sleep much better that night than he had the nights before, but he did sleep some. He was up at 5 and on the road by 6 with Rufus in the passenger seat and his thermos between his knees. He found the Bosch property from the parcel map coordinates he had written on a notepad the night before. The main farmhouse sat back from a gravel road behind a line of old oaks that had been there longer than the house. A light was on in the kitchen window. Calloway pulled up the drive and got out. He told Rufus to stay and walked to the front porch. Arlen Bosch came to the door before he knocked. He was a tall man in his late 60s with a weathered face and the deliberate movements of someone who had been working land his whole life. He looked at Calloway's uniform, and then at the truck, and then back at Calloway. He did not look alarmed. He looked like a man who had been expecting something, without knowing what shape it would take when it arrived. Calloway introduced himself and said he had a few questions about the property if Arlen had a few minutes. Arlen said he had time and held the door open. Calloway stepped inside, and they stood in the kitchen. Arlen did not offer coffee, and Calloway did not ask. He kept it straightforward. He said he was working a missing persons case, and that part of the investigation had brought him to look at land in the southeast corner of the county. He said Arlen's name had come up in connection with a parcel out that way. Arlen nodded slowly and said yes. The disused section in the back corner, he said there was an old barn on it that had been there when he bought the land. He said he had never gotten around to tearing it down. Calloway asked when Arlen had last been out to that corner of the property. Arlen took a moment before answering. He said it had been a while, more than a while. He said he could not pin down the last time exactly, but that it had been years. Calloway asked why. Arlen looked at the floor between them and was quiet for a moment. He said there was no good reason he could point to. He just had never felt comfortable going out that way. He said the air felt different near the back corner, heavier somehow. He said he had figured it was just an old man's nerves and had never thought too hard about it. He looked up and said he hoped that was not a strange thing to admit to a sheriff. Calloway said it was not and thanked him. He went back to the truck and told Rufus they were going to take a look. He drove the truck along the outer fence line of the Bosch property as far as the terrain allowed, and then parked at the point where the land flattened out into open field. He could not see the barn from there. It was further back behind a stand of trees that ran along a low drainage ditch. He got out, and Rufus jumped down behind him. They walked the perimeter fence heading southeast. The morning was cool, and the grass along the fence line was heavy with dew. Rufus walked close to Calloway's left side the way he did when they were in unfamiliar territory. They had gone about a quarter mile when Rufus slowed. Calloway noticed it and kept his own pace steady to see what the dog would do. Rufus slowed further and then stopped. He stood with all 4 feet planted and his head lowered slightly and his ears forward. He was looking at something ahead of them and to the right. Calloway stopped beside him and looked in the same direction. He could see the top edge of the barn roof above the tree line. It was maybe 300 yards out. The structure was weathered and gray and looked completely still in the morning light. There was nothing moving, no sound from that direction beyond the usual field sounds. Calloway looked back down at Rufus. The dog had not moved. He was staring at a fixed point somewhere between them and the barn, and his whole body was rigid in a way that was different from alert. Calloway crouched beside him and put a hand on his back and felt it immediately. Rufus was trembling, not shivering from the cold, a deep, fine tremor that ran to the dog's whole frame in a way Calloway had never felt from him before. He stood back up and looked out at the barn again. Nothing visible, nothing moving. He took his phone out and shot several photos of the barn roofline from where he stood. Then he took Rufus by the collar gently and walked him back to the truck. Rufus went without resistance, but kept turning his head to look back over his shoulder until they reached the vehicle. Calloway got him settled in the passenger seat and closed the door and stood beside the truck for a while looking out across the field in the direction of the barn. The morning was still. A bird moved through the tree line somewhere to the north and was gone. Calloway got in the truck and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine for several minutes. He thought about what he had. He thought about what calling it in would sound like. A shape in the background of photographs that only he could see. An arc traced across a map by pins. A farmer who had not visited a corner of his own property in years because the air felt different out there. A dog that would not stop shaking. He did not start the truck for a long time. When he finally did, he drove back to town without stopping. He did not call the department on the way in. He did not stop by Arlen's to say anything further. He went home instead of going to the office and sat at the kitchen table for an hour. He spread the county map out on the table and looked at it. He looked at the pin he had mentally placed on the Bosch parcel in the southeast corner. He thought about the barn. He thought about Rufus trembling at his side 200 yards out from a building that looked like nothing more than an old piece of rotting timber and rusted hardware. By the time he went to bed that night, he had already made up his mind. He was going back. He was going alone. He was going the next evening after dark when nobody would follow him out there and nobody would ask him to explain what he was doing on the property of a man who had said the air sits different in that corner of the land. He turned the light out and lay in the dark, and for the first time in several days, he felt something that was not quite fear, but was close enough to it that the difference did not matter much. The next morning, he drove out to the property early and stopped at the end of the gravel road for a moment before pulling in. The oaks along the drive were still in the windless morning. He sat there with the engine idling and looked at the farmhouse and thought about what he was going to say to a man he had never met about a corner of his own land that the man had been avoiding for years without knowing why. He pulled in and got out, and Rufus stayed in the truck without being asked. He did not tell anyone where he was going. He signed out at the normal time and drove home and fed Rufus and changed out his uniform into dark work clothes. He put a flashlight and his sidearm on the kitchen table and looked at both for a moment before picking them up. He took both. He drove out to the Bosch property in the dark with the headlights on low and turned off the county road a quarter mile before the gravel drive. He parked the truck on a flat strip of grass beside a drainage ditch where it would not be visible from the road. He sat in the truck for a minute with the engine off. Rufus had been quiet the whole drive, which was unusual. He sat in the passenger seat with his head low and his eyes forward and had not moved to the window once. Calloway reached over and scratched behind his ear, and Rufus did not respond the way he normally would. He just sat there. Calloway got out and went around the passenger side and opened the door. He waited. Rufus looked at him and did not move. Calloway said his name once. Rufus looked at the field beyond the ditch. He looked back at Calloway. He did not get out. Calloway had never seen him refuse to get out of a truck in 11 years. He stood there for a moment looking at the dog, and then cracked the window a few inches and closed the door. He crossed the ditch on a flat board that had been sitting there long enough to be part of the landscape and started across the field toward the tree line. The night was clear with enough moonlight to see the ground ahead of him without the flashlight. He kept it off. The field was roughly cut and uneven underfoot. The tree line that ran along the drainage ditch on the far side of the property was about 200 yards out. He reached it and pushed through the low branches and came out into the open ground beyond. The barn was ahead of him. It was maybe 150 yards out in the middle of the flat land, and the moonlight sat on it in a way that made it look older than it probably was. Every board looked like it had been gray since before living memory. The roof had a slight sag to it on the left side. There was a rusted metal latch on the main door, and nothing else on the face of it that should not be there. He stopped about 50 yards out and stood still for a moment. The air was different out here. Not cold, not warm. It was thin in a way that did not have a good word for it, like breathing at a higher elevation than the flat land around him had any right to produce. He stood in a moment and then kept walking. He reached the barn door and put his hand on the latch. The metal was cold. He lifted it, and the door swung inward without the noise he had expected from a hinge that old. The interior was dark and smelled of old hay and dust and something else underneath those things that he could not name. He waited in the doorway until his eyes adjusted as much as they were going to. Then he turned on the flashlight. The barn was empty. Dirt floor on the near half, a raised wood floor on the far half that looked like it had been installed to create a workspace at some point decades ago. Old tools on the wall that nobody had touched in a long time. A rusted hook and pulley system near the back, that was used for lifting. He swept the flashlight slowly across the wood floor section from left to right. He was about to cross the room when the beam caught something that stopped him. He went back to it. A seam in the floorboards running in a rectangle about 4 feet by 6. It was clean, not the natural separation that came from drying and contracting over decades. This was precise. The edges were straight in a way that only something maintained could be. He crouched and ran his fingers along the seam on the near side. It was tight, but there was a slight give when he pressed. He moved along it until he found the edge that had the most give and press again. A section of floor lifted slightly on the far side. He got his fingers under it and pulled. The entire rectangle came up smoothly on a counterweight mechanism hidden beneath the frame. It lifted without effort and held itself open. The mechanism was spotless. No rust, no dust, no wear of any kind, despite the barn above it being several decades old at minimum. Below the lifted section was a shaft approximately 4 feet square. A fixed ladder ran down one side of it. The shaft itself was not dark. There was a faint ambient light coming from below that had no visible source. It was not bright. It was just enough to make out the ladder rungs. He put his flashlight in his jacket pocket and climbed down. The ladder was 12 rungs. He counted them. At the bottom, he stepped off onto a floor that was not wood or concrete or any material he had a name for. It was smooth and very slightly warm under his boots and had a faint give to it, like something that was alive. He took the flashlight back out and held it up and then lowered it again. The flashlight was making things harder to see rather than easier. The space produced its own light from everywhere and nowhere at once. A sourceless glow that was enough to see by once his eyes adjusted. The bunker was a single large space. The ceiling was high enough that he could not see it clearly from where he stood. The walls curved inward slightly at the top in the way that the inside of a shell curves. They were smooth and dark, and when he moved toward one and raised his hand close to the surface, it shifted faintly in response. Not physically. The surface did not move, but something beneath or within it changed slightly the way a screen changes when you bring a magnet near it. He moved back from the wall and turned slowly to take in the full space. There were no panels, no switches, no screens, no visible power source of any kind. Structures rose from the floor in shapes that were not furniture and were not machinery and were not architecture in any sense he understood. They had the quality of things that had grown rather than been built, forms that suggested function without being legible. He moved between them slowly and ran his hand along the side of one and felt nothing but a surface slightly cooler than the air around it. There were no files, no papers, no storage in any medium he recognized. Whatever information was held in this space was held in a way that he had no access to and no framework for understanding. He kept moving. The bunker was larger than the barn above it, significantly larger. The footprint extended well beyond the structure overhead in every direction, and he understood as he walked that whatever was below him had not been built to fit beneath the barn. The barn had been built above whatever was already here. He came to a section of wall that was different from the rest. The surface carried impressions that ran from floor height to well above his reach. They were not random. They had shape and structure, and as he stood in front of them and let his eyes move across them, he began to recognize what he was looking at. Contour lines, elevation gradients, street patterns, the unmistakable shape of the water tower on the north end of town. He was looking at a rendering of Hallow Creek and the land surrounding it for several miles in every direction. It was not a map in any conventional sense. It was something closer to a record. Every road, every structure, every field boundary, every drainage ditch, Rendered in a medium that had no name in any language, he spoke with a level of detail that no satellite image he had ever seen could come close to matching. He stood in front of it for a long time. The whole town, documented completely. He moved on toward the back of the space. The biological quality of the construction became more pronounced as he went deeper. The forms here were less structural and more organic. Growth-like shapes that rose from the floor and curved overhead in configurations that his brain kept trying to classify and kept failing to. Several of them pulsed, a slow rhythmic contraction and release, so faint it was almost below the threshold of perception. He noticed it in his peripheral vision first, and had to look directly at one to confirm it was real. It was real. In this section of the bunker, there were 2 flat horizontal surfaces raised to roughly body height. They were smooth and slightly concave and had a rim around the edge that curved up just enough to be purposeful. The one on the left had markings around its edge. Not text, not symbols he recognized, but arrangements that suggested annotation, that suggested record. He stood beside it and put his hand on the surface. It was warm, warmer than the rest of the space. The markings around the rim had a quality that suggested they had been added recently relative to everything else in the room. He understood what the surfaces were for, without being able to say how he understood it. He knew what had lain on this one. He knew Claire had been here. He knew from the markings that she was not the first person to have been placed on that surface in this room. He stood there with his hand on the warm, smooth edge and did not move for a moment. Then he took his hand away and kept walking. The far end of the bunker was the strangest part. The air changed before he reached it. Pressure built against his eardrums in the way it does in an elevator or on a descent in an airplane, but without the movement to explain it. There was also a pull, not physical, not a wind or current. Something he felt in his sternum and behind his eyes, a draw in the direction of the far wall. The far wall was not like the rest of the walls. The surface did not shift when he approached it. It did not respond to his presence. It simply was not the same kind of surface. The boundary between the bunker air and whatever lay beyond was visible the way heat shimmer is visible over asphalt, a distortion, a place where the space stopped agreeing with itself. Through it the light was different, not darker, not brighter. A different quality entirely that had no reference point in anything he had seen before. The geometry beyond it was wrong, not subtly wrong, fundamentally wrong in a way that his eyes reported, and his brain declined to fully process. He stood at the edge of it and understood that whatever was on the other side was not anywhere on Earth. He was still standing there when the pressure arrived, not in his ears this time, behind his eyes. A sudden dense compression that came without warning and was accompanied immediately by a low hum that he felt in the roots of his back teeth, rather than heard with his ears. It arrived all at once, and it was close. Too close. He started to turn. He did not finish turning. Something closed around him from behind. Not hands. Not anything he had a category for. A force that pinned his arms and lifted him in the same motion and carried him forward toward the boundary at the far wall. The rift was directly in front of him. It was the last thing he saw before the pressure behind his eyes became everything, and the everything became nothing at all. He came around flat on his back. The surface beneath him was smooth and cold and curved slightly to the shape of his body in a way that felt deliberate. His mind did not surface all at once. It came up in pieces the way it does after a hard sleep or a bad fall. The last thing he could place was the far wall of the bunker, the boundary, the distortion in the air. Then nothing. He did not move. He kept his eyes mostly closed and let his breathing stay shallow and slow while he took stock of what his body was telling him. His limbs felt weighted, not pinned, just heavy in the way that meant something had been introduced to his system. He had been sedated. He could feel the chemical drag of it across his muscles and behind his eyes, but it was already thinning. He could feel that too. The edges of his thoughts were sharpening faster than they should have been. His body had always processed things at its own pace, and his diabetes had made that pace unusual enough that more than one doctor had commented on it over the years. Whatever compound had been used on him had not been calibrated for a metabolism like his. He lay still and let his vision clear the rest of the way before he moved anything. He looked at the space around him through half-closed eyes and tried to build a picture of it without giving away that he was awake. The environment was nothing like the bunker. It was the same biological quality of construction, but larger, much larger. The ceiling above him was high enough that the upper reaches of it were lost in a dim that was not quite dark. Nothing in the space was horizontal. Nothing was symmetrical. The forms that rose around him had no relationship to any architectural logic he understood. There was no floor in the conventional sense. The surface he was lying on was raised from the surrounding area by a structure that had grown rather than been built. The ambient light here was different from a bunker. It had a faint warmth to it that was almost organic. He breathed through it and let his eyes move without moving his head. He found Claire 4 feet to his left. She was on a surface identical to his, unconscious but breathing. He could see the rise and fall of her chest from where he lay. She was connected to a series of structures that ran from the surface into her at several points along her arms and at the base of her neck. They were not needles. They were not tubes. They were filament-like extensions of the surface itself that had attached to her skin at contact points so fine they were barely visible. He watched her for a moment and confirmed the breathing was steady. Then he sat up. He did it slowly and without any sudden motion. His head swam for a few seconds and then settled. The sedative was almost gone. He got his feet under him and stood and took one breath and then moved to Claire. He examined the filaments where they met her skin. They had not punctured her. They had adhered. He worked the first one free with his fingers, and it released without resistance. No pulling, no tearing. It simply let go the way a piece of tape releases from a surface it was never meant to hold permanently. He worked through the rest of them the same way. Each one released cleanly. When the last one came free, Claire made a sound and shifted. Her eyes moved under their lids. He put a hand on her shoulder and kept it there until she stilled again. He got his arm under her and brought her upright. She was not fully conscious, but she was not dead weight either. Some part of her was responding even if the rest had not caught up yet. He got her onto her feet and took her weight against his side and started moving. He had no map of this space. He had no visual reference for where the rift was. What he had was a memory of how the air had felt in the bunker when he was close to the boundary. The pressure in the ears, the pull in the chest. He stood still for a moment and breathed and felt for it. It was there, faint but directional. He oriented toward it and started moving through the space with Claire against him. The forms around them were strange enough that he kept his eyes on the path ahead and did not look at them directly for any longer than he had to. Some of them moved in his peripheral vision in ways that he did not confirm by looking. He kept moving. The pull grew stronger as he went. The pressure in his ears built in the way it had in the bunker. He was going the right way. Then the hum arrived, low and immediate, and felt in the back teeth rather than heard. He knew what it meant. He had felt it once before in the last seconds before the bunker went dark. The entities were aware that he was moving. He did not stop. He moved faster. Claire was stirring more now. Her feet were finding some of their own purchase on the surface beneath them. He did not slow down to help her orient. He kept his arm around her and kept his pace and talked to her in a low, steady voice. He told her his name. He told her he was the sheriff of Hallow Creek. He told her he was taking her home. He did not tell her anything else. The boundary of the rift appeared ahead of them as a distortion in the space. The same shimmer he had seen from the other side. The same rawness in the geometry beyond it. From this side it looked different, but he recognized the quality of the air around it immediately. He aimed for the center of it and did not slow down. He turned Claire toward it and pushed her through first. She went without resistance. The boundary accepted her the way water accepts a stone. He stepped through behind her, and the sensation was total and immediate. Gravity, cold air, the smell of old hay and dust and earth, the bunker floor under his boots. He had hold of Claire's arm, and she was upright beside him and breathing hard. He took 3 seconds to get his bearings. He was in the bunker. The ladder was to his left. He got Claire moving toward it and went with her. She was more awake now. Her eyes were open and tracking. She did not speak, but she was responding to his direction. He got her to the base of the ladder and told her to climb. She looked at the rungs and then looked at him. He told her again. She started climbing. He stayed below her and guided her feet to the rungs when she missed them. She made it to the top, and he heard her come through the floor section into the barn above. He followed her up. He came through the floor into the dim interior of the barn and got to his feet. Claire was standing near the wall, with one hand on the wood to steady herself. He crossed to her and took her arm and moved her toward the door. He got the latch open and pushed through into the open air. The night hit him, cold and still and enormous after what he had just come out of. Claire took a breath of it that was almost a gasp. He walked her away from the barn at a steady pace. He did not run. He kept them moving at the pace he could maintain with her weight partly against him. When they had covered about 60 yards, he reached for the radio on his belt and keyed it. He gave his location. He said he was on the Bosch property off the county road southeast of Hallow Creek. He said he had found Claire Hadley and needed units and medical immediately. He gave it twice and got a response from Patty on the evening desk, who said units were rolling. He kept walking. He had covered another 30 yards when the first one hit. Not a sound, a feeling, a low concussive thud that moved through the ground under his feet and traveled up through his legs and into his chest. He stopped walking. He felt the second one 7 seconds later, deeper, closer to the surface. He grabbed Claire and started moving faster and did not look back. The third one came and he felt it in his teeth. He pulled Claire down into the grass and got his body over hers and put his forearm across the back of her head. The barn went up. The sound of it arrived a half second after the light. A single violent detonation that threw a column of fire and debris straight up into the night sky. Then 2 more in rapid succession from below ground. The force of them moved through the soil in a wave he could feel under his hands and knees. Debris cleared the tree-line and came down across the field around them. He held his position and did not move until the last of it had settled. The field went quiet. He lifted his head and looked back. Where the barn had been, there was a crater that was already beginning to collapse inward at the edges. No fire remained, no structure, no visible trace of anything that had been below it. The field was dark and silent and empty. He got to his feet and helped Claire up. She was shaking but standing. He took his jacket off and put it around her shoulders. He heard Rufus before he saw him. The dog came across the field from the direction of the truck at a run and hit Calloway in the side hard enough to nearly knock him over. He pressed himself against Calloway's leg and stayed there and did not move away from him again. Calloway put a hand on his back and felt him trembling the same way he had trembled at the fence line 2 days before. He crouched down and held the dog for a moment in the dark field. The lights of the first responding unit swept across the far tree line as it turned off the county road. Calloway stood up and watched them come. Claire stood beside him wrapped in his jacket, and Rufus stayed pressed against his leg. He did not walk toward the lights. He just stood there in the field where the barn used to be and looked at the dark, flat place where all of it had been. He thought about what was in that bunker. He thought about the wall with the town on it. He thought about the 2 flat surfaces and the markings around the one that had been recently used. He thought about the rift and what was on the other side of it. He thought about the fact that whatever had been down there had destroyed every piece of it the moment it knew it had been seen. There was nothing left to show anyone. There was nothing left to prove any of it had ever existed. The unit pulled up along the fence line, and the doors opened, and he heard voices coming across the field toward him. He raised a hand so they could find him in the dark. He stood there with Claire and Rufus and waited for them to arrive, and said nothing yet about what he'd found under that barn. He was not sure he ever would.